welcome. I want to basically present Pramod Senarat Yapa, and he is here to talk to us about science communication and some of the things that he's been doing to promote science and his research. So welcome, Pramod. Thank you for speaking with us today.
Thank you. I'm very stoked to talk about everything.
Cool. So I guess I have a couple questions. So first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and your research. What are you studying?
Yeah, so I am going into my third year of my PhD in the Department of Physics. And the kind of field I'm in is called condensed matter physics, which may not be very familiar if you are not like an active researcher in physics. A lot of the hype and the marketing goes into the particle physics and the black hole physics, and condensed matter actually is not that well known, but it turns out it's actually the most, the highest number of physicists who are doing research actually work in condensed matter physics. And I think the reason why it's not as well known is because it's not not asking questions about stuff that's really far away out in space, looking at galaxies. It's not looking at matter that can only be produced in particle accelerators where you're accelerating things to the speed of light and seeing what comes out. Condensed matter physics has to do with what's around us most of the time. Just why do solids behave the way they do, and why is that different from how liquids behave or how gases behave, or what are even the states of matter that exist out of the solids, liquids, gases that we've been taught in our younger years. And then kind of like how all roads lead to Rome in physics, all roads kind of lead to quantum mechanics. And usually what we do, condensed matter physicists do, is figure out what are the properties of things all around us and how does that come out of the mathematics of quantum mechanics. So that's the field I'm in. What I study specifically is actually not that, it's not around us all the time. I actually look at helium and how helium behaves when you cool it down to absolute zero. So absolute zero being about negative 273 degrees Celsius. So it's not very accessible unless you have some very specialized equipment. And the reason why we look at it is because it's a fascinating element. It's the only actual state of matter or element or compound that doesn't freeze ever. So you could go all the way to absolute zero and it never freezes. Everything else we know, at some temperature, you cool it down, it's a gas, it turns into a liquid, and eventually the liquid turns into a solid. Helium doesn't do that. You can cool it all the way down, and at some point it turns into a liquid from the gas that we know and love, but it stays a liquid all the way down to absolute zero. And of course, the answer is quantum mechanics, but that turns out to be like only the tip of this iceberg of why this element is so fascinating. It actually turns into something that's called a superfluid, which means that liquids have some sort of viscosity. If you take a mug of coffee and you give it a stir, the liquid swirls for a bit, but then it stops because there's some internal friction or some viscosity in that material. And stuff like honey or olive oil is very viscous, water is less viscous. And helium, just like normal liquids, when you cool stuff down, it becomes more viscous. Like honey, if you put it in the fridge, will become more viscous. It does that up to a point. It actually becomes like olive oil once you cool it down to like negative 200 degrees. But then suddenly, like a switch is being turned on at some very critical temperature, it goes from being olive oil to absolutely no viscosity. So that means if you take this cup of helium, that's a superfluid, and you give it a stir, it will stay swirling forever because it has no friction. So why does this happen? It makes absolutely no sense. Why would cooling something down, which would usually lead to more viscosity, turn this into a zero viscosity substance? Turns out to be a consequence of quantum mechanics, and that's what I'm studying right now. So figuring out why does this very, very interesting phase of matter just come out of the blue, just for this very singular element, unlike any of the other elements.
That is so mind-blowingly cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. So like there are not that many labs in the world that can even look at these kind of questions. U of A actually happens to be one of them. There are like 3 or 4 labs in the world that can get down to the temperatures that would turn helium into this substance. So it's a very special place to be here too. I'm not in experiment, so I collaborate with experimentalists here. But it's amazing to sit in your office and know that 3 floors below you in a basement is one of the coldest known patches of in the universe. Actually, the universe is at an ambient temperature of like 2 degrees above absolute zero, and then on Earth there are like 4 places that can get down to as low as 0.0002 degrees above absolute zero. It's a pretty special place to work, having that knowledge that the basement of CSIS at the U of A is one of the coldest places in the universe.
That is like the coolest thing. I didn't even know that. I learned
Yeah,
something new already. That is so cool.
fantastic.
That is really, really interesting. So tell us a little bit about, you're really interested in science communication. Tell us why you think science communication is important.
Yeah, so I mean, science communication, I feel like there are an unfathomably large number of reasons why science communication is important, but maybe I can focus it down to 2 reasons that are a bit more personal to me and why I do it. So firstly, I think about why I became a physicist or a scientist myself, and it has to do with because some scientists before me decided communicating to the public was important, because I can trace back, kind of the origin story of why I wanted to become a physicist to like 5 or 6 years old. And like my dad reading from Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time. So it's this tiny book, but it explained, how Stephen Hawking thought about black holes that had never actually been seen before, but he just like wrote down some equations and thought really hard and discovered that there are these entities known as black holes out there in space. And the math is really impenetrable. Like you're not going to be able to glean much by looking at the equations. But Stephen Hawking took the time to write a book that didn't use equations, but told us about how you can use this tool that is mathematics to understand things that you never even will have the opportunity to ever experience with your own eyes or touch. And so that left a very lasting impact on me. I didn't end up actually going into studying the physics of black holes, but I went into physics because I had this memory, this idea of what a physicist was. Even though what I do right now is not something I could even comprehend as a 6-year-old in a bedroom in Sri Lanka. Just that idea that is transmitted from the experts to kind of the level that people without a background in physics can understand. It's very important. How do we inspire the next generation of people to become scientists and do important work? It's because people took the time to communicate their science in a way that's easily digestible. So in a way, for me, it's very important and personal, because I want to kind of pay back that inspiration that was there for me as a child, and hopefully get more people, because I think doing science is an amazing thing, and we need to get more people to do it and engage with it. And yeah, it's super important just from that perspective. But if I'm going back away from the origin story side of doing science, like why do we do science? Is do we do it because we want to write an arcane journal article that'll get a number of citations and it's locked behind a paywall forever so a few experts can see? Like, I don't believe that's the reason I want to do science. I don't want to check the number of citations I do, but I do want to like create new knowledge and like explain to people about these new amazing things that you may not know about. And so, I have the privilege of sitting at home and solving equations all day. And that's because as a society, we've decided it's important to invest in science and to invest in fundamental research. And I think it's then a responsibility of those people who are in those positions to do this kind of research, where I get paid to sit and think about this very specific element that only does this very specific behavior in 3 labs in the world under the most like extreme of circumstances. Like, it's an amazing opportunity that I have to be able to do that. And I can do that because society values it. And the way then you have an obligation to give that information back, not to have it locked away forever, only for experts to see, but for everybody to enjoy. So I do see it as a responsibility. It's maybe not expressed as much when you're a scientist. You do try to just get journal articles out there, but I do think it's a deep responsibility giving this knowledge back to society. That's part of being a scientist.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, I remember reading parts of that book myself. And I remember Carl Sagan. I got to meet him when I was a kid and when he was still alive. Yeah, I still tell people that because I'm way more starstruck about that than anything else.
Yeah.
But I was a space camp kid, and I was very lucky I got to meet him. But yeah, it's funny how those things in childhood, those encounters you have in childhood, can have a real impact on you, and that's fascinating. And I agree. I think it's absolutely correct. I think I completely agree with you about the responsibility to share what we're doing. We're doing some pretty amazing things here at the university and universities all over the world. And so we have a responsibility to share that back. So yeah, so thank you for that. So what do you see as some of the challenges for those interested in using alternative methods of science communication? Because one of the things we talk about in our workshop is that there's the traditional way, which is the presentation at a conference or a publication you publish in a journal. And those are sort of the ladders that you climb in academia to become a professor and to get your sort of street cred in academia. So what are some of the challenges that you see in doing alternative ways of communicating science?
I think it's absolutely related to what you said. We've set up academia in a way that we value what we can quantify. So the number of papers that you can, the number of conferences you go to, the amount of funding that you get. And that implicitly kind of seeps into the culture of how we do science, how academia is structured, of these are the important things. So focus your time on that. While if we think about science communication, it's like you going out there and you're reaching some number of people who are not immediately, giving you grant money or giving you citations on your paper. And there's sort of a culture that's been built around like, we can't measure the impact of that, so why should we care about that? So I think the biggest hurdle for doing alternative methods of communicating science is actually a cultural one. It's the people in academia, we've been trained to think in a certain way where we value journal articles, but we don't maybe value going out into the public and doing a large public presentation where we tell people about our research. So it's a very hard mental barrier, I think, for a lot of people to get to a stage where you think it's important, but to also do it because you're a little bit afraid of how you'll be perceived by the people around you. And this is not something I am immune to. I can't count so many times where I'm like, oh, this is a cool idea, but I'm afraid to, bring it up in my research groups to my professors, the supervisors, and my peers in the grad program, because I'm afraid of how it'll be received. Like when I did my dancer PhD, I wrote it in, 2017, and I didn't actually tell my supervisor that I did it until a year later when I won dancer PhD, because I was like, I don't know how he's going to receive this. Is he going to say this was time you could have spent doing some sort of problem and solving a problem in quantum mechanics. Instead, you spent hours and hours of your life making a musical about electrons. On the face of it, that seems weird. It's really a strange thing, within the strict framework of academia to do. And that's why I didn't tell him. I didn't tell him until, I won and then started getting some press about it. And then I was like, oh, okay, now I feel like this is okay because there is some tangible thing I can show. It's like, I did this, and here is the thing you can measure. It is now, it's validated from the outside. And my supervisor actually turned out to be super cool about it. I probably should have told him before, because these cultural ideas are also everyone else is just like, yeah, I'm not going to talk about it because I feel like the culture is insulated against doing alternative methods. But a lot of people have interests outside their science. They're not robots that only do their science. People love the arts. People consume so much media, and it's not that far-flung of an idea to combine the sciences and the arts. That's been happening forever. And getting over that initial fear of rejection by the professors you admire and the researchers that are real serious about their science. Once you get over that, actually, you'll find that a lot of people do appreciate these kind of things. Maybe if we talk about it more, those fears and the acceptance by the community will be there. But I think that's the largest hurdle. We need to talk about it more, talk about how important it is, and it'll make it easier for people to reach that kind of threshold amount of to just thinking about it to doing some sort of alternative science communication activity.
Yeah. So do you feel that maybe like some of the people who are maybe against or not as positive, don't positively receive this kind of science communication, is maybe just afraid that science might be taken less seriously, or that it simplifies it too much? Do you think that that's where that sort of attitude is coming from, or what's your thinking on that? Like where are they coming from with their sort of I guess negativity?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, I don't know, there could be many different reasons, but I think maybe some other facet of academia I can connect it to is like imposter syndrome, right? Everyone feels like they're an imposter in their field, or a lot of people do. It's very widespread in academia, regardless of what stage you're in, whether you're doing grad studies or you're even a professor. Sometimes you look around you and you only see, the awards that your colleagues are winning or the amazing papers people are producing, and you're like, I don't feel like I can compare, and you feel like an imposter. So it's very, the way you can fit into the culture is just, yes, repeating what seem like the traditional ways of being appreciated within your community. So I think, just to fit in, people will say things like, yeah, you shouldn't be spending time doing activities outside of doing the science, very hard scientific endeavors. But if you make people, give people the license to explore different things where they don't feel like an imposter, if you make them feel comfortable in their community, people are more willing to do these things that may seem a little bit out there. So I feel like there's these external pressures that make people conform in the community. So it might not be that they don't feel like this is not valuable. They're just afraid to say it as well. And they feel like this is the attitude I think
you're right. I think you're right about talking about it, like talking about it and being open about it. I think that will change. I think that changes culture over time. I think it's also like just getting the next generations in, like yourself, the younger grad students in, doing their research, and also having excitement about sharing what they're doing in a different way, and using media in ways that maybe wasn't possible during the time when their professors were graduate students. Like a lot of the video you did of a physics conversation probably would have been really tricky to do 20 years ago. It would have required a lot of money, a lot of time, and it would just not have been as easy to make. I'm sure it was challenging to make, but nevertheless, the tools have become more widespread.
Absolutely, yeah.
So speaking of a physics conversation, how do you get your ideas? How do you get inspired?
Yeah, so I mean, this is like the $1 billion question. How do you get inspiration for anything? It just seems so, I don't know, it has a will of its own. It appears out of nowhere, inspiration, and then kind of flows through you, and you can only hold on to that inspiration and then hope it holds until you can make something out of it. So I'm not sure I have a very concrete answer to how I get inspiration, but I think what you can do, like what you can control, is the steps that are there before you get inspired. There are can you, like, what comes out of the inspiration you have is very dependent on kind of the groundwork you put in before it. So I like think about the Dance Your PhD thing. You know, looking at it as a product by itself, it was like a lot of luck and some like weird aligning of the planets that allowed me to do it. Like I just finished my master's. I wasn't starting my PhD until 8 months later. I'd been hired to do a little bit of extra research work by my master's professor, but like I had done my thesis. The pressure was off. I had a little bit of extra time. I had another postdoc in my research group there and talking about doing like filmmaking stuff for a little while. So these like weird random timing things that just came together and made it happen. So those are the uncontrollable aspects. Like sometimes the planets align. But then I think about, okay, the year or two leading up to that, and there were things that I felt like in retrospect, I was kind of like in planning to do this Dance Your PhD musical for years. One like story that I like to tell about this is like, used to, you know, take the bus from my, I was living in Victoria. I used to take the bus to work every day. And suddenly, you know, I just get struck by like some rhyme of like two dumb physics words. I'd be like, oh yeah, these words rhyme. And instead of, you know, having that moment pass through you, what I did while I was on the bus was just like, I wrote down a note of like a rhyming couplet about superconductors. I would just have a random note in my phone. So I did this for a couple of years. And so by the time this opportunity came to do a musical about electrons, I had a phone full of like rhyming couplets about superconductors and like disparate concepts in physics. So I had this like little resource. I didn't use everything there, but it was just like, oh, I had put in some work there. I can use this as a stepping stone to do stuff. I had talked to my friends about how like superconductivity was related to swing dancing because you have like two people dancing together, just like electrons, you know, swirling around each other in a metal. And so there are these seeds that have been planted for years. And when the time came, and I didn't know this like randomly happened that I had the opportunity to make this video, I had the kind of the workflow. Nothing was stopping me from like just creating at that point. I had the inspiration, so nothing was stopping me. I had a mini studio recording set up at my house because I used to like make music randomly. And then I was like, oh yeah, I have some lyrics. I can record it right into my computer. So controlling the controllables is very important, and that, you know, you can start making stuff without like a clear plan, and then once the inspiration hits, what comes out of that inspiration is very much dependent on those little tiny little things that you did before.
So don't ignore those little things that come into your head when you're on the bus or riding your bike, hey?
Absolutely, exactly. Yeah, make a record. Like maybe you don't want to show that as a finished product to the world, but like, hey, it's on your phone. It's not doing you any harm. So yeah, follow those little threads.
Awesome. So what kind of advice would you give to students or faculty who want to share their research using alternative means like what you've done with video and with dance? Like any advice?
Yeah. So maybe, thinking about it, one of the biggest reasons I was able to do stuff like this was because I had a very supportive community around. So finding that community, it's like the benefits of finding a supportive community is like an uncountably infinite number of benefits to that. And, you know, maybe that was a little hard a little while ago, like you were saying, you know, finding community, like doing all these things has become much easier in the age of technology, in the age of social media. Those barriers are kind of gone. There is actually a large science communication community that's sprung up in Canada over just the last couple of years. You can go on Twitter right now and just like follow some hashtags that have to do with like hashtag SciComm or something, or hashtag, I don't know, Dance Your PhD. And you can find all these amazing people who are doing really cool work. You can go on Instagram, whatnot, and find a lot of scientists who are interested in stuff like this. So finding a community where you can, you know, interact with people and just, you know, be given the license to be creative is so important in doing stuff like this. It's very hard to sit alone in your bedroom and, write all these different ideas down. But as soon as you bring them out to light, if they're, people are questioning why you even do that, it's probably not going to get made. So finding people who think like you is super important. So firstly, yeah, I guess find your community. Secondly is letting perfection be the enemy of good enough is one of those really, it's taken me a long time to figure that out as well. Like, especially as scientists, sometimes you're striving for perfection. You need to get everything in place before you put it out into the world. And that doesn't have to be the case. Just, if your end goal is to write some Broadway play about, I don't know, DNA and ribosomes, you're probably not going to have the resources to do it right now. But it's perfectly okay to do stuff that may not even seem related. Okay, maybe you can write a short story, put it on the internet, write a blog about it, and see what that short story becomes when people interact with it. Maybe you don't even have to do that. 3-minute thesis is something that's available to everyone. If you want to do something for people, it's great to go and see what resonates with an audience. So going and doing a 3-minute thesis may actually seem unconnected to writing a play about ribosomes, but you understand what people respond to. So, all of these little things that are good enough, they're not exactly what you had in mind, kind of compound into a web of support to finally, once you reach the stage where you're able to make the thing that you've been dreaming of, you'll find that you're able to. So it's make things. It's okay to not be the perfect thing that you imagine it would be, because you don't have all the skills that are available all the time to make that thing. But if you put in one brick at a time, eventually you'll end up with a house that you're proud of. So yeah, put yourself out there and make the things that you want to in some small way.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That really sort of sums up my questions. Is there anything else you want to share with participants of the workshop?
I would highly encourage people to actually get on Twitter to see what people are doing, because I feel like that's where science Twitter, it's kind of a strange place. You have all these professors and grad students swirling and just interacting with each other in a way that you never would imagine in real life. So when you get into an institution, the hierarchies are easy to see when you're in a building and people have their nice offices and you don't get as much time to interact. When you go on Twitter and you'll see these back and forth dialogues between academics that kind of disregard the boundaries, the hierarchies that we have in our mind. And I think that itself is pretty amazing to see what is possible outside the confines of your institution, of your department. It's pretty amazing to see. And sometimes that can provide you, the license to do the things that you want to. Twitter can be a weird place. It can also just be this dumpster fire of it's just random people doing things. But if you figured out if you don't have the community that you need, do the things that you want immediately in your surroundings, you can find it on the internet. So yeah, this is going back to the community aspect, but science Twitter is a great place to start.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, this has been great. So thank you so much for talking to us today.